Good evening, everyone. Hopefully, you guys can hear us all clearly. And
Hey guys, how are you?
pull up the comments. Everyone, please share the stream. I'm going to be having a chat with Jordan tonight from the Libertarian Party, and just going to learn more about him, learn more about the party, and sort of dissect where the party is now, because it's been quite a interesting few months and few years for all of us.
Yeah,
We're all
definitely.
good.
It's great to be here with you, and yeah, I'm loving your work and loving having a ready source of things the politicians don't really want us to know they're doing. So yeah, you're doing God's
Well,
work.
my the thing that we were just talking about before, and I think that would be the first thing that we can touch on, is that the similarities that I found between me and you were just interesting, to say the least. I saw your post last night where you said that you had a stint in prison, and equally, I had a stint in prison, and I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah, because we'd already organised to catch up, and yeah, you obviously didn't know that part of my story, but it's been a pretty epic journey, man. I've had a bit of a roller coaster, a bit of an epic sort of ordeal the last 9.5 years, and it's been it's been a roller coaster.
Yeah, so what's sort of like the hero's journey arc for that? Because for me, I felt like I was wrongfully prosecuted during COVID for organizing the protests, and then after I left, I was sort of had to regather myself, um, fix up my physical and mental health, and then go from there. What's your current transition from that past, and then now tapping into the political space?
Yeah, 100%. I think that this will resonate with you. I was told early on in my prison term that prison's somewhere you can either get bitter or work on yourself. And that certainly was the case for me. I really found that for me, it gave me something rather than took something away. And it was a real circuit breaker for me and a silver lining that actually let me decide who I wanted to be after I got out. And a lot of people never get that opportunity. So even though my reasons for being there were definitely not heroic and definitely not, being a political prisoner and sort of fighting for freedom like you were, nevertheless, it really did allow me to turn my life around and to start living a life that was a lot more in tune with my values. So I got out of prison in October 2017, so really only 7 years ago. And I just had a fire lit under me. I was so motivated and so grateful for what I had. Even during COVID, as bad as the lockdowns were, I knew that there could be worse deprivation of liberty, that even with those restrictions, there was still so much we could choose to do and pursue. And yeah, basically, I was just determined to use my experiences to try to help other people who had struggled with drug and alcohol addiction as well, and to try to make amends for the harm I'd done, but also to actually just be someone who was reliable and who was a leader in my own life and in my own community. So everything I've done since that time, when I got out, I got my business degree finished. I did half of that while I was away. I got my personal training certificate done while I was on parole. I got my drug and alcohol counselling ticket, and I did a bit of time volunteering at a residential rehab down in Geelong, Foundation 61, near Mountain Need, and sort of was able to help a lot of guys who were really struggling with the same sort of life controlling issues that had caused so many problems for me. And a couple of those guys I'm still in touch with, and they're now, multiple, 4 or 5 years in sobriety themselves. Some of them have started a family and all that sort of stuff. So it's a really good feeling to know that I've been able to create some good out of what happened. And I think what my experience has taught me most, and what the sort of hero's journey, as you describe it, has been for me, is realizing that you have to be accountable. You have to be responsible for how you respond to things. There's a lot of stuff in the world you can't control, and you can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you respond to it. And that sort of radical accountability and self-responsibility, and also the importance of disclosure and the importance of really being upfront with people about, who you are, what's gone on, never letting something just kick on and become a really big problem. If there's a problem, it never gets easier with time. It always gets harder. And by the time a problem's really obvious, it can be really difficult to fix. And I think if we apply that to politics, I see a lot of lack of leadership in our political space and a lot of politicians who know there's a problem, and they might even often know what the solution to the problem is, but instead of dealing with it and doing the hard thing, they kick it off down the road and tell us that we don't have to sacrifice to solve that problem. And I think most people intuitively know that's not right, and they can feel.
With the achievement part of your post from last night, you said that you had completed your legal degree. Is that something that you're looking to integrate in your political expertise?
Yeah, so if anyone's followed my socials for a while, even before being endorsed as a candidate, I was often using the legal training I'd received to help unpack and understand what bills mean, how to understand how bills interact with each other. Often people only look at a small part of the puzzle or a small piece of the puzzle that is actually connected to a lot of other legislation and a lot of other things within the bill. And there are rules to how you read legislation and how legislation will actually interact with the real world. And a lot of times the politicians coming up with these ideas and drafting the legislation don't really understand those rules. They're making legislation almost with a blindfold on, just thinking about hopes and dreams and unicorns and what they want to happen, but they don't actually have the understanding or awareness of how that legislation will interact with the real world a lot of the time. So yeah, to that extent, I've been able to use my legal training and experience to my advantage in politics and try to help people understand what they're actually seeing. So you've been doing an absolutely terrific job of bringing a lot of stuff to people's visibility, but even with a direct window and watching what's going on in Parliament, watching what's happening with legislation, sometimes, and I've often had people come to me and actually ask me to explain something you've shown them. So this is this is our first time meeting, but I feel like we sort of have been working together almost before we met, because I'll often have people come to me and say I saw this thing that was via the agenda posted. It was like a video clip, but I don't really understand what was going on, or I don't understand what it means. Can you explain it for me? And so that's where my experience and skill set lies, is because I've had a long involvement with politics as well. I've been involved. I was a former young Liberal, so I was involved in the Liberal Party from age sort of 21, and I basically really grew out of that and became very disillusioned with the Liberal Party, because they were a lot more interested in being tribal and red team bad, blue team good. They didn't care whether an idea had merit or not. They just cared about where the idea was coming from. Yep. So they really just wanted to play political football, and they didn't want to actually decide things on the merits and on the actual worth of the idea. Like we've seen in the last couple of weeks, the Greens have had a couple of positions that might have been for the wrong reasons, but the positions were good. If they're opposing something, that's great. A lot of Liberal Party attitudes, if the Labor Party or the Greens propose something, even if a broken clock's right twice a day and it's a good idea or it's in the right position that they land, the Liberals will say no. Even if it's good for the country, or even if it's actually what they would do if they were in power, if it's the Labor Party or the Greens proposing it, they're not interested. So, and I think that's really the height of recklessness and putting their own interests before the interests of the country.
And with the Libertarian Party, I see a lot of people always sort of argue the case, saying that you're preaching to the choir, you're talking to people that are already converted. What's the best way that you think to prosecute your case to reach a broader audience? Because a lot of the people that follow you guys, a lot of people that follow me, sometimes it feels like we're just talking to the same people. What's the goal with trying to communicate to a broader audience? Because ultimately the challenge of a minor party is to try to become, a major party and, really take control of the reins of the government. I think that's the best way to form government. What's your way to overcome that and try to communicate to more people?
I'll answer that question in a second. I just noticed in the chat and the comments, a few people are sort of asking, what do they go to prison for, and all that sort of thing. And I know you didn't want to focus on that, but I just want to quickly answer that question. Yeah. I can do that with a small detour. So I was in prison for, yes, drug-related offending, so drug use and trafficking. That was a long-term problem I had. And I also had a small business that failed, and basically I took money from people and used it to try to keep the business trading, and it was trading insolvent. And so I had some white-collar theft, fraud-related offending as well. So that's just to give the guys in the chat a bit of an idea. No, I didn't have to join a prison gang, and no, I didn't do my law degree while I was in prison. They don't let you do that. But going back to your question, I actually think that the goal for a party like the Libertarian Party, is actually different to the goal of the major parties. The major parties, and this is why they are so disappointing and why so many people in your chat are basically concerned even about preferences going to the Liberal Party. I can see that, and that's a real concern. The reason that they're different is that they want to win 51%, and they have to. So they will do whatever it takes to be populist, to be moderate, to not live by their principles if those principles are going to cost them something. So that's the nature of major party politics. They're trying to get 51%. And so they sacrifice whatever principles they might have on paper. Like if you looked at the We Believe statement for the Liberal Party from Robert Menzies, and you looked at our constitution, the principles our party strives to achieve, they look pretty similar, right? But the difference is the Liberal Party want to try to get to 51%. They want to try to basically, through whatever means, reach that magic number. What we're trying to do is, yes, ultimately one day get to that point, but we want to get to that point by actually convincing people of our ideas. Our party recently changed its name. We used to be the Liberal Democrats, and the Liberal Party waged lawfare on us and actually passed legislation to stop us from using the name Liberal, which was pretty illiberal.
Yeah, I saw that there was like a high court challenge. And
yeah, that's right. And in a way, I think that was the best thing they could have ever done, because it made us go back to the drawing board and think about what name would we choose to actually emphasize who we are and what we stand for. But my point is, you've got an opportunity now with our name, Libertarian Party, that whatever vote we get at the next federal election, people like Anthony Green, people like the majors, they're not going to be able to say, oh, this was name confusion, this was just preferences or random vagaries. That they will not be able to say that the people who chose to vote one Libertarian didn't agree with our ideas. And I don't want the number that we get in the first preference count on the election night to be anything other than how many people agree with us or want to give our ideas a shot. So you don't have to be a Libertarian to consider voting one Libertarian. You just have to believe that our ideas are different to what's being tried now and might be better at helping our problems that we're facing as a nation.
So one thing that we can sort of touch back on with your backstory is stigma. So there's a stigma attached to that with your past, and you've gone through this journey to try to overcome that and transform yourself. I saw in the last day, I think it was today actually, and then over the week, you guys recruited Craig Kelly and Steve Christou. How do you overcome the challenge of the stigma attached to those guys? Because I understand that you guys have noble reasons to recruit them, but there's a small and probably annoying community of people that always, talk about the stigma attached to their, political affiliations with Craig Kelly, and some of the controversial takes that are attached with Steve Christou. How do you overcome that stigma and that challenge of recruiting people that have become disillusioned?
Yeah, for sure. So, like, if you think back to the last federal election, we had Campbell Newman, the former Premier of Queensland, join our party. And that was kind of like a similar thing to what's now happened with Craig Kelly and with Steve Christou and others, where we've had sort of high-profile defections from people who might have been in the Liberal Party, for example, before. And, like, I myself have had that journey. So I was once in the Liberal Party. And there are a lot of people in the Liberal Party who are not really conservatives. They are actually classical liberals or small L liberals. There's even libertarians in the Liberal Party. But there are also conservatives who value free speech and other shared values, who really are disappointed with the Liberal Party and have realised and seen how the Liberal Party has actually thrown those values under the bus. And my personal feeling with this sort of thing is that once people are inside the tent and join our party, that's then our opportunity to educate them and bring them along on the journey to becoming more libertarian and to modelling libertarian values and making libertarianism seem like a good idea and a desirable value set. People will usually be on a journey where they might start off with a lot of exceptions and a lot of things that they still think the government should be involved in. And, they might think, government needs to be involved in roads, or government needs to be involved in education at the federal level. And then over time, as they sort of experience things more and speak to people more within the party and learn more about those policy issues, they will go along a journey. So I think that we shouldn't be gatekeeping, and we shouldn't be saying you must pass a libertarian test before you join our party. There's an entry exam, and if you don't know all about Rothbard and Friedman, you're out. I don't think that's the right way to go. And I think you can be a genuinely broad church, like the Liberal Party used to say it was, without sacrificing your principles and values. So that's the mission, and that's the journey we're on now. We're trying to bring people with us, gain momentum, appeal to a broader base and get more members. But we're also trying to make sure that we're living consistently with our values and selling policy solutions that are libertarian ones, and basically demonstrating why those are a good idea.
Do you have a strategy to overcome the problem with voter apathy in this country? Because even I sometimes feel like that.
Yeah, it's a big problem. And I think last time a lot of people thought COVID was going to be the election where, it was going to be the final battle against the major parties and they were going to get overturned and something was going to change. And a lot of people were really disillusioned when that didn't happen. And I think that it's easy to get black-pilled and to sort of think, well, why does it matter? Why should I even bother? But we're actually closer than we've ever been to, there's no statute, there's no category. Major parties doesn't exist. That's a word that the major parties use that we allow them to use, and we use the language as well, to give them some special status, when really all it means is they were either there first or they've got more support at the moment. And that can change very quickly. And the major parties' votes at the last federal election across the country were pretty much 2/3 of the country. Nearly a third or more of all Australians voted for a minor party. So I think that you've got a massive opportunity. And I think that we're very, very close to that first domino falling, that suddenly everything will seem like it does make a big difference. And I know last time was disappointing. This time we've got a huge opportunity to get libertarian voices into the Senate. And I think you will see, if we're successful, if I and others from the Libertarian Party are able to be elected to the Senate, you'll see what I think a lot of people have wanted to see for a long time, which is a party that actually is using the platform to try to grow that beachhead, to actually challenge the major parties, not just at election time, but once they get within the system. Because I think we've seen a lot of false starts, and we've seen a lot of parties in the Senate and on the crossbench, whether it's the Australian Democrats, whether it's One Nation, that just haven't actually taken off as people would have hoped they would have with the amount of time they've had. And I think that one of the reasons that hasn't happened is partly ego, partly that desire to keep things under control and to have a strong personality that defines the party and controls the party. We as a party don't have that. We're not a party of personality. We're not a party where there's any one single figurehead. There's myself, there's John Ruddick, there's David Limbrick. And I actually would feel comfortable, if you were just to do like a vox pop, like Avi Yemeni does, if you were just to go up to one of our members on the street and say, hey, what's the libertarian position on this? I would feel extremely comfortable with any member of our party being able to answer that question as well as any of our MPs. And that's something that's a pretty amazing, that's a real strength, because we're not just kind of waiting for the leaders to tell us what we think. We can actually reason our way based on our principles to what our policy positions are going to be. So that's what makes us different. And that's what gives us that opportunity to actually grow that beachhead and become that Greens of the centre and right.
Yeah, one thing that I learned is that the questions without notice during question time are not questions without notice. They are basically told what questions they are. But with regards to sort of the disenchantment, how do you, is there a strategy in place to make sure that you don't do the same thing and make the same mistakes? Because I think a lot of the apathy comes from, you become a politician because you want to change, and then you, over time, systematically fall into, the complacency, and you start to make integrity decisions based on, maybe someone offering you some sort of deal in exchange for your vote, or lobbyists. How do you make sure, or what is the strategy to ensure that doesn't happen?
Well, the only strategy that can make sure that doesn't happen is to select great candidates, and there's no getting around that. If you put people in, like Clive, for example, had Jackie Lamy as one of his candidates, right? And she was somebody who got into Canberra with Clive's money and Clive's help, and then within a couple of weeks, the Canberra machine set about its work. And before too long, Jackie thought that she didn't need Clive, that she would have got in anyway. And she's in there for 2 terms, basically, as a senator. And before you know it, Jackie is basically picked off from the herd, and her vote can be bought and sold on any given issue. And suddenly she's ineffective and she's part of the machine. So that's because Clive basically didn't put a lot of effort or care into selecting his candidates. With our party, we've never had an MP leave our party from being a sitting MP. We've had MPs voted out. We had Tim Quilty in Victoria lose his seat in 2022, but we've never had an MP defect or leave the party to become an independent. That's because all of our candidates are people who believe in our party's values and what we're trying to achieve. And that's something that we're really proud of. And it makes a difference when you get into Canberra, when you get into the machine, because you have a genuine grassroots sort of political family, if you want. Like, Libertarian MPs act the way they do in Parliament in a principled way, partly because they're answerable to our membership and to our tribe. Like, there's like that Simpsons, groundskeeper Willie meme of like, the only thing libertarians hate is other libertarians. It's libertarians are notoriously raucous and fractious and very quick to let people know when they're doing something that might be in breach of our principles and our policies. So, we're very answerable to our members in a way that a lot of politicians aren't. And we've seen in the last week or two, the Liberal Party definitely aren't. They think that they can basically throw their values under the bus and that their members will just lay back and think of England and rock up and hand out how to vote cards in the rain anyway. And if that was ever true, it's not true anymore.
So what if something like a Fatima Payman situation does occur?
So, yeah, look, as I said, that's never happened before in the Libertarian Party's history. And I think that it's never likely to happen because we've got members and elected MPs who don't mind being in the minority. They don't mind, using their vote on principle. I'll give you the example, and this was one that I always really held as the pinnacle of respect. Tim Quilty, when David Limbrick was doing what I'm doing now and running for the Senate at the last federal election. So there was a period of time where David stepped away from his state upper house seat to be the federal candidate. And Tim Quilty was the only member of our party in the upper house in Victoria. And during that time, they passed laws to ban the swastika. So to ban Nazi symbolism in Victoria. And in the upper house of Victoria with, over 50 MPs, 60 MPs, however many there are, Tim Quilty was the only member of that chamber that voted against that bill. So this little mild-mannered bush accountant from Albury was standing on one side of the parliament on his own with every member of the upper house in Victoria looking at him and saying, "What, do you agree with Nazis?" But that's not what it's about. It's about the principle of free speech. It's about the principle of freedom of association and freedom to criticize bad speech. And Tim stood on his principles and he was one against the whole upper house. And that is the nature of our party. That's the kind of integrity and principles we hold.
With sort of like the challenge of, like one thing that I'm sort of observing, especially lately with me watching the Senate, is Ralph Babet and his position in the Senate. He's got a very valuable vote, but because he's not part of the Labor Party or the Liberal Party, he is only just sort of like a loud voice in the chamber more than anything, with all due respect. And my fear is that, say you take up a seat, you're just probably going to fall into that position where you might be able to have a strong voice, you might be able to get some great sound bites out of it. But how do you break from that stigma? Because I feel like it's almost like a waste in a way because of that duopoly. How do you challenge it in a way that is not going to be sort of attached to that way that I sort of described it? And again, with all due respect to Ralph Babet, because he's a great example of someone that is very outspoken, but is very powerless in his influence with regards to his vote. How do you try to overcome that challenge if you were to be in that position?
Yeah, no, I understand exactly what you're asking. It's a great question. I think that there's two answers to that. The first is that in the last couple of weeks, we've seen situations where individual senators' votes can be critical and really important. We obviously knew where Babbitt was going to vote on these issues. So in the end, his vote wasn't pivotal this time. But it can be that in the Senate in particular, a single vote can be what outcomes hinge on. And we've got single MPs in Vic Upper House, New South Wales Upper House, John Ruddock and David Limbrick in Victoria, John Ruddock in New South Wales. And you can see, like, John Ruddock actually got laws passed recently where there was a easing in restrictions on the use of mobile phones as a GPS for P-platers in New South Wales. And Libertarian Party actually proposed an amendment to legislation that passed. And the Liberals' opposition were actually really shocked by that because the Labor Party and a couple of other parties worked with our party to actually pass legislation from a one-person representation in the upper house. So I think that you can definitely punch above your weight. You can have an outcome and an impact that is far outsized compared to the one vote you have. And I think that the reason single members like Babette, who, yes, he's with the UAP notionally exists on paper, but it sort of only exists because he's there. There's not like a party that supports him. There's not a platform or a real strong policy position that he can talk about. He sort of has to decide issue by issue what he believes in or what he is going to say. And I think that sometimes that lack of support can limit what a senator can do. We've already seen, I think that people like you and people like me have been able to make an impact on the Senate in the last couple of weeks, not even being in the chamber at all. So I think, no, and that's true. I'm not sort of just, blowing smoke up your ass when I say that. I genuinely believe that the last couple of weeks have shown the impact that the power of one or the power of many acting together from outside the parliament can make, and people underestimate it. And I said when I was promoting this space, and you might have read it, that I heard from a number of coalition MPs that I still keep in touch with, and they were not particularly happy that they were under as much scrutiny and had the world watching them like they did. They're not used to that. They're used to Canberra and Parliament outside of question time being a bit of a safe space. They're not used to people watching Parliaview and much less live streaming it to tens of thousands of people. That is shocking to them.
Night at 11 p.m.
Yeah, 100%. And you've been going all day, right? And like you and I both know that X's count for like, how many people are watching just keeps ticking over. It doesn't matter, never resets or whatever. So over the whole day, you've got that build up of numbers, but they don't know that. And they think, holy shit, 70,000 people are watching us live right now.
Either way, it's in Hansard.
Oh, 100%. Exactly right. Oh, absolutely. And my point is that it just goes to show how much impact a single individual can make even from outside the Senate. And I know that if I can get into the Senate, my knowledge of politics, my knowledge of the law, my knowledge of procedure, that's the other thing. There's all these rules and you'll be encountering them as you're watching the parliament. It's almost like learning a different language where you have to understand what a division means. You have to understand what a guillotine motion means. You have to understand there's a whole different sub-language that isn't even
just over the last couple of weeks with the Pauline Hanson situation, I corrected myself in the mistake of misunderstanding the pairing situation.
Yeah, 100%. And it's all these things. And nobody who is just an average person on the street, and before becoming a senator, Ralph Babbitt was probably never involved in politics. He put his hand up for the UAP as their lead candidate. He probably wasn't someone who had a long political career. And that's a great thing as well. Like, you do need people who have that real world experience. But I've got the real world experience because of all the stuff we talked about before and my sort of hero's journey and all the different sort of experiences I've had. But I also have the political veterancy and experience to know that language, to know that world, and to be able to actually play them at their own game, because you can do that and win. And, you can influence what the major parties do as well. If I was in Babbitt's position today and if I was elected, you sort of said, what would I do? I would be building relationships. I would be going door to door, and I woto be canvassing and pushing. And, you're never going to get rid of lobbying in Canberra, but you can actually use that to your advantage as well and try to actually say to like Brian Marlow is someone from the ATA and Legalised Vaping and a couple of other hats he wears, where he uses that power for good. He sort of says to the coalition, hey, do you know that if you do this, the Libertarians are going to punish you? And then they ignore him and we punish them. So, but, my point is, a lot of it's about relationships. It's about like hustling and building relationships, making things work. If you've ever worked in a team, you know that one person can even lead up the chain. If you're not a manager, but you're motivated and you know what the job is and you need to get that done, you can help lead your team even if you're just one person in a team. And I feel like that's what politicians should be doing. That's what we're paying them to do. And they're getting paid a lot of money, and a lot of them don't do that work.
On that topic of teamwork, I see this comment almost at least a dozen times a week, where someone or a lot of people will say, why don't all the minor parties form, one united Avengers party, come together, and then, try to actually break the duopoly in Australia? Why is that always a comment that I see, and why doesn't it happen?
So I think the comment is born out of real frustration with the uni party and a real desire to see something rise to challenge that. People really are growing so frustrated and increasingly burnt out and disillusioned with the major party system in our country. And so people who are outside the political space looking at a couple of different minor parties like the UAP, FON and Libertarians, and maybe not really understanding or seeing the differences between them, or thinking those differences aren't important enough to maintain separate parties. A lot of people want an alliance and cooperation for that reason. But as for why it hasn't happened, I can say, and I've been sort of talking about this a bit on X and sort of responding to some of these queries when they come through, when I think they're good faith, because sometimes they're not good faith. Sometimes people just message us and say, just join with FON. Why do you exist? That's not a good faith. I'm not going to respond to that with as much detail as what I'm going to sort of talk about now. But after the last federal election in 2022, myself and Bob Day, who was a former senator for Family First, he used to work with David Leyonhjelm, our senator for the party. He and I basically came up with a plan, and it was a coalition plan for the Senate. So we basically had a plan where we said for each state, we're going to have a coalition. So we're going to have, like the Liberal Party and the National Party do in the Senate, we're going to have individual people on the Senate ticket who have their own party names next to them under the line, and above the line is a coalition alliance name. So let's say it's United Nation or United Libertarian Nation, right? Let's just say that for the sake of the argument. In Queensland, One Nation might have the number one spot, and all the parties that form part of that coalition would get behind that number one winnable spot and pool their votes in the Senate. So you'd have lower house contesting however they want to do it. In the upper house, whoever's in that coalition, all of the members of that coalition would pool their votes towards that winnable seat in that state. So they're not competing against each other for the spot they can actually win. Each state has a different member of the coalition set up for that winnable spot. So in Victoria, it might be me at number one, and the UAP and One Nation votes would fall in behind the Libertarian votes to try to get me elected to the Senate. In New South Wales, it might be the UAP. In Queensland, it might be FON. And so instead of all competing for this notional one winnable spot, but having our preferences and our vote disperse so that no one wins it, we're basically choosing to contest fewer spots as an individual party, but having a more guaranteed or a more certain chance of getting elected. So following that process would basically have ensured Malcolm Roberts will be re-elected. I'm worried that he might not be. We've got great Libertarian candidates in Queensland running as well, who I obviously support and want to see win. But if you're looking at an incumbent senator like Malcolm Roberts, who is in the Senate now doing very good work, if one of our candidates, the Libertarian Party, were to not win, I would want to hope that a Malcolm Roberts or a Jared Rennick would get a spot. But because we're all working separately to each other, that might not happen. And in fact, I think it's a fairly likely outcome that the Liberals will get that sixth spot instead. And that's a shame. And I put that coalition agreement, that alliance plan, to people like James Ashby of One Nation, and he said, I think it's a great idea. I like what you're proposing, but we're not a minor party anymore. And they weren't interested. And then a couple of months later, Mark Latham split in New South Wales, and FON went one step forward, two steps back, as has been their history over their whole duration, where the ego stops them from cooperating, but then it also limits their growth. And that's not a criticism I hope to work with. If I'm elected, if there are senators from One Nation in the Senate, I want to work with them where we've got shared values, and I wish them all the best, and we agree on many things. But the Libertarian Party has been leading the push for pragmatic Senate cooperation, and we're still there holding the torch, waiting for anyone else who wants to join us. But it might be that has to be prosecuted again from a position of a Senate spot if I'm elected. So,
with regards to that, do you guys have plans to try to overcome you've got about a 5-6 month at max period of time to try to overcome the challenge of voter education? Do you guys have a plan to overcome that?
Yeah, so I saw, I don't know if you saw, Topher posted up a still of a new Marbles video he's making. I'm not sure if you saw that.
Yeah, I saw that. He's going to release that tomorrow, I think.
Yeah. So he's basically in the process of making another Marbles video that goes beyond, like his first Marbles video. If you guys have seen it, I'd recommend you check it out. It sort of explains how your preferences work. But basically, this new video he's putting out, I think, is going to be talking more about like why it's important, what preferences actually are, and how you can't, in our federal system, you can't waste a preference. You have complete control over where your preferences go. And in the lower house, to do a valid vote, yes, you have to number every number in the lower house. And unfortunately, that means at some point you have to decide which of the major parties your vote is going to go to first. And I noticed a lot of comments in the chat about, you guys are still supporting the Liberal Party. At the end of the day, most of the time, we think that a Liberal government will generally be a little bit less shit than a Labor government. That's the highest I can put it, right? And this is as an ex-Liberal member. The way I feel about the Liberal Party is a bit like when you see an ex someone you
How
used
do
to
you
be.
argue that though, after we saw the Liberal Party gang up with the Labor Party, stack the numbers in the Senate, ignore 15,000 submissions, push the debate to only 1 hour, less than Simon Birmingham's farewell speech, and then vote on it through a guillotine at 11 o'clock at night while everyone else was asleep? How do you
I
prosecute that
totally
case?
agree.
Because that pisses me
They
off.
100%, mate, and they shouldn't be forgiven for it. And I'm not in any way suggesting that they're deserving any credit, even for opposing the MAD legislation, because that was originally their bill. So trust me, no one is harsher on the Liberals than me, and we'll come to my my plan to punish them for their weakness shortly, because that was my brainchild. But basically, so I don't give them any credit. I don't excuse them at all for the mistakes they've made. And when I say a little bit less shit, I mean like a millimeter skerrick of something you couldn't even measure with a microscope. At some point, you have to decide which one you're going to preference. At the next election, for me, I'm a big believer in nuclear energy. And I worry that this election is essentially going to be a de facto referendum on our ability to see nuclear power and the overthrow of the renewables regime in our generation, in our lifetime. So if a gun to my head, at some point on that lower house ballot, you've got to select one of the majors to put before the other. Probably where I'm landing at the moment is that the Liberal is the marginally less damaging, but I would much rather see the Libertarians overthrow them in the long run.
One thing that I didn't actually know, but it kind of makes sense. It says here, Australia is the only Western democracy without some kind of National Human Rights Act. And this was from the Human Rights Commissioner. I couldn't think of a better period of time to prosecute the case, to have an amendment or have a referendum to see if there's, public consensus around having this. Is there plans to try to prosecute that case? Because I feel like if that is put in place, or if even the steps to make that argument, a part of the political discourse coming into an election, are there plans to do that? Or is that something that's not as important as like the, cost of living issues that resonate with everyone?
Well, the Libertarian Party actually opposes compulsory voting full stop, and it also opposes compulsory preferential voting. So we believe that voting should be voluntary, that you shouldn't be forced to vote by the power of the state. So you should have to choose to vote and exercise your franchise. You should, in essence, have the freedom not to choose any particular candidate. I can see a lot of people in your chat who would love it if that was an option, if they could basically select two parties they liked, or even one or none. We also believe that it shouldn't be compulsory to number every box. You should be free to say, these are parties I like. I don't like any of the others enough to potentially give them my vote. That should be the way things are, and that's what the Libertarian Party would like to see. So if you want to minimise the number of future elections you have to vote at, you have to select parties that you hate, we're the only option on the ballot that's going to allow you to achieve an Australia where you're not going to have to vote for parties that you disagree with.
Do you think Australia will ever have a moment like Hong Kong, for example, where like there's an actual civil uprising?
I think if that was true, we would have seen it already, unfortunately. I think that Australians like to talk about that we're larrikins and that we're, easygoing. And that's kind of like the myth that we've sold about ourselves to ourselves. But what COVID showed us was what Jordan Peterson says and hypothesized would be true before COVID, where he said people like to imagine that they'd be the Anne Frank or the conscientious objector or the person, hiding someone in the attic or in the basement. What COVID showed us is that most people would be the prison guard or the denouncer or the collaborator. That's human nature. And I say that as someone whose family is a German immigration after World War II background. Like, it's the ordinary people. It's the banality of evil. When people do nothing to stop harm or to stop encroachment on liberties, that's the true evil. And I think that, unfortunately, our society is quite primed to comply. And I think anyone who's in the Libertarian Party is not a compliant sort of person. I suspect most of your audience falls in that percentage of Australians who are not compliant people, and I'd encourage all of you to continue not complying. And if you want an Australia that at least has a voice for you and your non-compliance, then libertarians are the way.
Don't comply within the parameters of the law.
Well, Topher
When I
says good
get
people
any
break bad laws. So
charges of
I've just within the last 24 hours been granted a compliance certificate to apply for legal admission. So I'm not going to say break the law, but I'm going to say, within your conscience, if you believe that a rule or a law isn't good or doesn't serve a positive purpose, you should make that decision on a case by case basis. I don't think the law has anything inherent to say about what's good or moral. You can be following the law to the letter, and you can be a war criminal or someone who is deserving of condemnation and commits quite evil acts. Everything that the Nazi regime did during World War II was completely legal in Nazi Germany. So it's worth reflecting on that.
What are your thoughts on the fallout of the social media minimum age bill passing? One thing that Matt Canavan said was that he believes that this vote is going to inspire a new generation of people to be more politically active and vote these fossils out, basically. What are your thoughts on the fallout of that bill passing? And I feel like, with respect to, say, people like Pauline Hanson, Malcolm Roberts, Gerard Rennick, some of the best things that they've said have inspired me to be more politically educated in doing what I've been doing over the last couple of years. However, I feel like there is a overall misunderstanding between their generation and our generation.
Yes.
Being born in the 90s, I think we are gifted of being able to understand like the early 90s, and then also like the rise of social media, and
Yes.
then also a little bit of the older generation values as well. What's sort of like your idea on the fallout from that bill passing, the generation coming through, and then sort of maybe is there like an idea to almost want to clean house, and like not like I'm trying to think of the best way to argue it, but like keep the good ones and then like get rid of all the shit.
Yeah, well, look, I think that when it comes to what you said about the 90s and sort of our generation, I think that we saw, like, one of my earliest formative memories when I was in year 7 was the September 11 attacks. And that was something that was just a huge influence on my life and the way I saw the world. And I saw the sort of, I suppose, the lies and the falsehood that was prosecuted in the war on terror, all the false justifications of why we're there, the way that WikiLeaks was treated and prosecuted. That was a huge eye-opener to me. And I think that even though it might seem less dramatic, these kind of really petty government overreaches and kids having their birthright taken away from them, essentially. This is a digitally native generation who have grown up in the digital town square, and they're as familiar with moving online as they are in the real world, perhaps sometimes more so. And that isn't always a good thing. There are harms that come from kids being more comfortable in the digital realm than in the physical realm. But those harms belong to parents to mitigate and to make decisions around. But when Matt Canavan said what he said, I agreed with him. Joel Jamal at the same time tweeted that a whole new generation of libertarians have been born. And I think that the people who are going to get more politically active that Matt Canavan talked about are not going to be joining the major parties. And they're not going to be joining the Greens. They're not going to be joining parties that they don't think are genuine and authentic. And I think that the Libertarian Party is that option where the Greens were this sort of generic feel-good protest movement of the left, and they were able to grow and rise to where they're at now off the back of that. I think the Libertarian Party can be the voice of under 35s of this generation who feel lost, and they don't feel like anyone's got a narrative for them. They feel like they're worse off than the generation before them, and they're right. And the older parties and the older members of those parties don't have an answer for that.
I just wanted to sort of get you to explain the policy side of things with regards to either yourself or the Libertarian Party more broadly. I don't really understand policies. I'm more of that one issue type person where if there's an issue that resonates with me that pisses me off and someone has voted or a party has voted a particular way and it's opposed to my values, I'm instantly like, nah. So I just want to maybe get you to sort of explain, you guys and your policies, what you guys represent, and just sort of amplify that message as best as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. I think that a lot of people respond to issues in terms of how it makes them feel. And I think that a lot of people have responded to recent political issues and they've felt betrayed and they've felt like the politicians aren't making decisions in their best interests. And that's pretty accurate. I think the voters are almost always right. The major parties don't have a lot of respect for them, but I think the average person on the street has a lot of wisdom. And the Libertarian Party's fundamental policy tenets are what might once have been called common sense. And they're not so common anymore in terms of values and attitudes and the way things are pushed. You know, we're believers in respect for the life project of other people, as long as they're not harming anyone. That you should be free to do what it is that makes you happy and that you want to pursue and that your talents suit. So long as you're not causing harm to anyone around you, more power to your arm. Libertarians are believers in Austrian economics. We believe that the government should have no place in the economy. Basically, we believe that free markets really are the solution to almost all problems the government claims that it's needed to solve. And we have a government here in Australia that has grown so fat and bloated, and we have a government class of laptop warriors, of people who work from home and are in the Canberra bubble and have no idea what people are experiencing out there in the real world, where we are in the depths of a 7-quarter recession. And it doesn't matter what the economics say, it doesn't matter what the forecasts and what percentage number they put next to inflation. The average person on the street knows that they're in a deep recession and that they're going backwards. And that reality is being denied by every other major party. The Albanese government says that it's going to go in a 40% share of your home to give you a house to live in. Like, I don't want to be a joint tenant and own a home with the government. That's not the goal of home ownership, is to be dependent on the government, because people don't realize that 40%, they're telling you they're going to let you buy a home for a 2% deposit and they're going to give you whatever it is, 38% of the difference. Their value in your home goes up as the value of your home does. So if you buy a house that's worth $1 million and then a couple of years later it's worth 1.2, the government's share of equity in your home goes up as well. It's not a set price. They're in the business of getting into the housing market, essentially. It's like tricking you into putting yourself in social housing that the government partly owns. That's what this is at the end of the day. And
it almost sounds like a World Economic Forum power play.
It does, doesn't it? And if you listen, and I always like to listen to what my enemies want to tell me about them and what they're trying to do and what they're afraid of. And a lot of people listen to what their enemies tell them and they don't believe them. And they don't actually take that warning as legitimate. But you listen to what the WEF says, and they say that libertarians are the biggest threat to their agenda of public-private partnerships, that libertarians want to get the public government aspect out of people's private lives, and there should be no intrusion in the private sphere by government and public-owned entities. That's what Klaus Schwab says about libertarians, and he says we're a threat, we're an anti-system, and we're a threat to their agenda. That is what the man himself describes as the biggest threat. He's not describing conservatives. He's not describing Donald Trump. He's not describing, he's describing Malay. He's describing what we stand for. We are the antithesis to that idea. Globalism is not the opposite of nationalism. It's the opposite of libertarianism, of private thought, of private enterprise. That's what they're terrified of. They're terrified of losing control of the narrative, not to states, nations that they can collude with and, sort of co-opt the leadership of. They're worried about losing control to you, the sovereign individual. So, going back to Libertarian Party policies and principles, we believe that you are the best person to make decisions for your own life and for your family. We believe that the natural organizing unit of society isn't the government. It's not even the individual, the atomized individual. That's something the state tries to tell you is real and should be natural, but it's not. That's why people are so sad and depressed and isolated, because we are tribal creatures. We have families and we have communities and we have sporting groups and churches and charities, and we organize ourselves in these kind of freely voluntary units, and they're all competitors to the state. So that's why they're constantly getting smashed, constantly getting regulated, because the state wants to be like Mussolini. It wants to be everything inside the state, everything for the state, and nothing outside the state. That's what they want. And that's exactly consistent with what we've seen.
A couple of final things, and then we'll end it there. I saw this article come out a few hours ago. I just wanted to see what your reaction to it is. Shock poll reveals Dutton on track for majority election win. Your reaction to that news from a few hours ago?
Yeah, look, there's lies, damned lies, and polls, and I think that we're going to see lots of polls that say that and the opposite in between now and the election. I do think that this election is Dutton's to lose, but I think that the way he's tracking, he's on track to lose it. And I have no problems. I just said to you what my preference gun to my head would be if I was forced to nominate one of the majors to put in front of the other tomorrow. But if Dutton keeps going down the path he's going down, and if he keeps betraying Liberal Party principles, and if he keeps basically acting in a way that is completely indistinguishable from the Labor Party, then we will make an assessment on preferences when it comes closer to the election. And I think he is absolutely capable of losing. The fact that the Liberals are even within arm's reach of winning government from a one-term opposition is a testament to how shit the Labor government is and how much Albanese has been unable to get a win, and he's just lurched from one disaster to the other. He's gone to The Voice. He's gone to all of these, terrible issues and distractions at a time when people just want to hear how they're going to get out of this mess that we're in terms of economics and paying for our groceries and our petrol. That's the only thing people care about, and he wants to talk about everything except that. So, if Dutton wins, it's not going to be because the coalition is great and people love them. It's going to be because Albanese is one of the worst prime ministers we've ever had. Now, I want to be in Parliament in the Senate so that if Peter Dutton does get elected, I can say to him, hey, remember all these promises you made? Remember what you were going to do on free speech? Remember what you were going to do on nuclear energy? All of these things that he said he's going to do. I want to make sure that whichever of the major parties does win government at the next election, that you guys, that us, we, the people who are critical in thought and who do want a different voice to represent us, has a voice in the Senate.
And final thing, you sort of spoke about it before, but I'll get you to extend on that. Your brainchild with regards to the was it disillusioned
Yes.
Liberals? I'll pull it up shortly, but I just wanted to see if you wanted to expand on that to sort of hit home your final message to the viewers.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is evidence of what I'm saying, that we have absolutely no hesitation in taking the fight to the major parties. I woke up on Sunday 2 weeks ago now, and I thought this age restriction for social media, this age verification for all users of social media, is every bit as bad as the misinformation, disinformation bill. And what can we do? What are our options to actually try to stop this and to try to reverse the Liberals' position? So I actually decided that the best way we could try to change their mind and attack them would be to say that if they don't change course and if they support the bill, which they ultimately did, then we would launch a free financial membership for ex-Liberal Party members. Now, I can tell you we're now in six figures. We've got over 120 new members of the party in the last week from this promotion, of people who are sick of the Liberal Party. They're tired of being taken for granted and having their principles thrown under the bus. And we've had many more than that who basically said, look, I don't even care about the free membership. I'm going to get a full financial membership. So this is causing panic waves through the coalition. They are horrified of the idea of a summer where the Libertarian Party is rampaging through the fields and setting fire to crops and villages in the political metaphor sense. And I just intend to inflict as much pain on them as possible and make this next election, at least in part, about free speech, and try to make sure that these horrible censorship laws are repealed. So that's what that's about. We've got plenty more to come on that front, and we're going to continue to criticise the Liberal Party until they actually act in accordance with their values.
I saw this comment here. Maybe you just want to extend on it. What are members afforded with regards to their say?
Yeah, absolutely. So as a genuine grassroots party, we have the option for members to become involved in committees, to volunteer, to attend branch meetings. In Victoria, we've basically got about 10 branch meetings that meet every month. So you're going to have a community of people that you can connect with and engage with. You'll be able to vote at important things like the AGM. You potentially be able to stand for office yourself. In states like New South Wales, members have a say in who they elect and select as candidates. I'd love to see that in my home state of Victoria, but one thing at a time. I'll get myself elected first and then advocate for that change. But our party is a genuine grassroots party. If you want to be a part of a movement that's trying to achieve change in the community, not just at election time, but I've been campaigning for the last 6 months. So we don't wait until elections to try to use your volunteer support to win a seat and then ignore you. We're a party where you will have access to myself, to other candidates. And if I'm elected, I'll continue to have a lot of regard and a lot of interaction with our members as well. So like Elizabeth says here in the chat, it's free speech and liberty and fiscal responsibility and economic responsibility. The Liberals have abandoned the field when it comes to productivity, when it comes to industrial relations, when it comes to the economy. There's so many areas where they've dropped the ball, and we will be a voice to both appeal to their better angels and to demand real change in these areas if we're given the balance of power.
Sorry, I just realized I was mute. It was great to have a chat with you, and it was awesome to learn that we had a lot of things in that were similar, you know, from going to prison to having a personal training background and then becoming politically active to different degrees, but, you know, with the ultimate goal being quite similar. So it was great to have a chat with you. I've pinned in the description of YouTube, and it's also tagged in the post. If you guys want to follow Jordan, this is his X, probably the best platform. I think that's something that we can 100% agree on.
I totally agree. Absolutely. And look, Anthony, as well, I was going to say, if I'm elected, I'd love to invite you to Parliament, to the Senate for my maiden speech. If I do get across the line, you can live stream from the Senate, perhaps security arrangements pending. I don't know whether you can actually stream from inside the building, but you'll certainly be invited.
I'm sure after the last mention from Matt Canavan, something can be organized. I've already prosecuted a strong case, so I will use that as my leverage.
Very good.
But thank you guys for joining us. If you want to follow Jordan, this is his X, and I really appreciate your time. And one comment that I did see that I didn't want to address, but I'm going to address: my affiliation with any party is non-existent. For me, I want to amplify the voices of people that I think that resonate with me, but I'm not gonna do it in exchange for anything with regards to becoming a part of their party, or in exchange of any gifts or any money. My goal is to solely stay as independent as possible, amplify the messages that resonate with me. And I'm happy to also have people on that have differences with me, because I love a great argument as well. But yeah, I just wanted to address that. And if you guys do want to support, the link is down below as well. And I really appreciate your time as well. Thank you so much for joining me.
No worries, mate. Thanks for having me.